In the afterlife, you could be headed for some serious strife. Now you make this scene all day, but tomorrow there'll be hell to pay.
Alright, hello there, thrill seekers. And that song was called Hell, and it's by the Squirrel Nut Zippers. And even though this video is called Where Did My Dad Go When He Died, I didn't pick that song because I think my dad went to hell. I picked that song because it begins in the afterlife, and I was thinking about the beginning of that song because I wanted to talk to you about Buddhist concepts of the afterlife. I didn't pick it because I think my dad went to hell. Did I just say that? I don't know. Anyway, I don't think my dad went to hell. But I wanted to talk to you about Buddhist concepts of the afterlife, and this is because I've been asked a lot since my father died. He died almost exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving, and people have been asking me, especially people in my family, about Buddhist ideas of the afterlife, and it's really hard to give a quick, easy answer. The quick sort of easy answer, what do Buddhists believe about the afterlife, usually ends up being Buddhists believe in reincarnation. Now, I addressed this in my book, Don't Be a Jerk, if you want to go get a copy of it, a few years ago, in a chapter called, let me make sure I get the answer, the title right. It was chapter 6. Did Dogen teach reincarnation, and does it matter if he did? And in this, I discuss Dogen's kind of weird waffling? His kind of weird back and forth view on reincarnation, because you can find things that seem to conflict. So, I talked about one of these in a video I did just before my dad died, ironically enough, and it is his statement in Genjo Koan, which goes, "Firewood, after becoming ash, does not again become firewood. Similarly, human beings after death do not live again." So you can go about 2 weeks back, I don't know, in my videos on this channel, and you can see where I gave a whole talk about that on this very video channel. So that seems to kind of put the kibosh, is that the right Yiddish word? I don't know, ask my nephew. He didn't really study Yiddish, even though he's really proud of his Jewish ancestry. Anyway, kind of puts the kibosh on the idea of reincarnation, rebirth from Dogen's perspective. But the other thing that I talk about in that chapter in Don't Be a Jerk is his essay Doshin, which my teacher gave the English title of The Will to the Truth. And it appears in his book 4 of Shobogenzo, if you want to go find it, the Nishijima Cross version. It appears, it's not one that usually gets translated when people do like short compilations of Dogen's Shobogenzo. In fact, I have another complete Shobogenzo which doesn't even include Doshin at all. So sometimes I guess it's not even included in the complete Shobogenzo, but it's usually considered part of complete Shobogenzo. Anyhow, it contains certain lines which seem to kind of get into what happens after you die. So I will read this to you. He's talking about how we should chant praise to the three treasures, which are Buddha, which is Buddha, Dharma, which is the Buddhist teaching, and Sangha. Is there a fly in my hair? Yes, there was. Which is the community of Buddhists. Okay. Asleep and awake, we should chant praise to the three treasures. Even between abandoning this life and being born in a next life, in which period there is said to be a middle existence whose life is 7 days, even during that period we should intend to chant the three treasures without ever lulling the voice. After 7 days, we are said to die in the middle existence and then to receive another body in the middle existence for 7 days. At the longest, this body lasts 7 days. He's talking about the after-death state. At this time we can see and hear anything without restriction as if with the supernatural eye. At such a time, spurring the mind, we should chant the three treasures. We should chant without pause, not forgetting to recite Namu Kie Butsu, Namu Kie Ho, Namu Kie So. That's a praise to Buddha, praise to Dharma, praise to Sangha. When, having passed out of middle existence, we are drawing close to a father and mother, we should steel ourselves, and even when due to the presence of right wisdom, we are in the womb storehouse world. That's the next phase of the process towards rebirth, reincarnation, that will commit us to the womb. We should chant the three treasures. We might not neglect to chant even while being born, which would be a real surprise to our mother-to-be, and so forth. And that's really, he kind of goes on to another topic after that, but he seems to be describing what's called Chu-u in Japanese, and Chu-u is composed of two Chinese characters which literally mean middle and existence, so middle existence. Sometimes it's translated into English as intermediate existence, and it is a stand-in or a translation of a Sanskrit word Antarabhava. And I was wondering for a long time where Dogen got this idea. So I spent some time, and I still haven't found a definitive answer, but I feel like I'm getting close to an answer. It appears from the research I've done that this idea of intermediate existence it doesn't first appear in Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha. Abhidharma Kosha, which is a 5th century work which was written by a Buddhist guy named Vasubandhu, who is a part of the Yogacara school. But that appears to be the place where it sort of solidified. It appears to be an idea that was kind of gaining traction for a number of years in Buddhism and finally got kind of solidified in Vasubandhu's book Abhidharma Kosha Treatise, which is his commentary on a work called the Abhidharma, which is a Buddhist deep philosophical work of ancient Buddhism, even more ancient than the 5th century. And I was looking at Dogen's biography written by one of his students, Keizan, and it happens to mention that when Dogen was 9 years old, he surprised everybody by reading Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha. Kosha or Kosho? Kosha, I believe, is how it's pronounced. Anyway, so that's probably where Dogen was first introduced to this idea, and he also studied in the Tendai school of Buddhism. And Tendai Buddhism gets into these sort of esoteric concepts. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Tendai Buddhism. In fact, I just ordered a couple of days ago some books from Amazon about Tendai Buddhism to see what I could find out as far as what they say about this stuff and other things, to see what he might have learned there. So I assume he got it from Vasubandhu's book and from whatever he learned in Tendai Buddhism. Now, another clue as to what is kind of in the air in Buddhist circles about this stuff, I picked up from this book, The Zen of Living and Dying by Philip Kapleau. Now, Philip Kapleau has some interesting stuff to say about the intermediate realm. Again, this is Chu-u. And unfortunately, he doesn't tell us, Kapleau doesn't tell us where he got this stuff, but I'm just going to read to you what he says. So here we go. It is the teaching of sages from Buddhist and other cultures that at the moment of death, we begin our transitional existence, which is the intermediate realm between death and rebirth. See diagram 4. There's diagram 4. This realm is very different from the physical plane, but in one respect it is identical. For just as our ego-based perceptions affect the way we relate to and interact with our environment and events in this world, similarly does our karma stemming from both the last and many former existences affect the way we relate to the experiences of an intermediate life. There are said to be 3 primary stages in the transitional state. Now, here it sounds like he's expanding on Dogen. But anyway, here we go. The initial stage consists predominantly of physical sensations of freedom and is relatively short in duration. At this point, a tenuous connection to the physical body still remains. One may be acutely aware of the actions and words as well as the thoughts of living loved ones. This sensitivity and awareness mean that any words directed to the deceased at this time, as in chanting, for example, can bring about an awakening. The second stage encompasses diverse sensory experiences and lasts longer than the first. In the final stage, the entity is drawn according to its karma to a particular rebirth. The process from death to rebirth is said to take place in cycles of 7 days or multiples thereof, usually 49 days. That's 7 weeks of 7 days. But this figure is not fixed. It can occur in a day or a week or not until many years later. Presumably, the time of rebirth is determined by, among other factors, the attraction of the being to parents with whom it has a karmic affinity. As was mentioned earlier, the 7th, 8th, and 9th levels of consciousness do survive death. Karma, or the force of will, continues in its cyclic propulsion through death, after death, and rebirth, but we also possess a semblance of our other senses in the intermediate existence. At the moment of death, the first 6 levels of consciousness become transmuted from a physical orientation to a non-physical until we take on a solid, in quotes, body again. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch and intellect are incipient, functioning in a tenuous way without a body as a vehicle. They cannot be fully utilized, but neither are they completely absent. Zen Master Yasutani explains it this way. This intermediate being is constantly changing and does not have any rigid form. It is said to be much superior to present life existence. It is like an electric current. It can pass through all obstacles and even fly hundreds of miles in a moment. It is also said to have intellect, emotions, and will of a tenuous nature, as well as the 5 sensory organs. It is said that the intermediate being has some mysterious power to see, feel, and find its parents, and that it is able to see the sexual intercourse by which it may be conceived, etc., etc., and it kind of goes on from there. Now that's real interesting stuff. A much more detailed account of this stuff appears in this book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Now this is Sogyal Rinpoche's book that's kind of his expansion on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it's pretty interesting. There is a lot in here. Let me see what I can give you, just a kind of a taste of it, because I don't want to make this video infinitely long. It talks about the mental body, and what he calls the intermediate realm is the bardo of becoming. Our mental body in the bardo of becoming has a number of special characteristics. It possesses all its senses, it is extremely light, lucid, and mobile, and its awareness is said to be 7 times clearer than in life. It is also endowed with a rudimentary kind of clairvoyance which is not under conscious control but gives the mental body the ability to read others' minds. At first, this mental body will have a form similar to the body of the life just lived, yet it is without any defects and in the prime of life. One of the ancient teachings of Dzogchen tells us that the mental body is about the size of a child of 8 to 10 years old. During the first few weeks of the bardo, we have the impression that we are a man or a woman, just as in our previous life. We do not realize that we are dead. We return home to meet our family and loved ones, but they do not reply or even show they are aware we are there. As hard as we try, nothing can make them notice us, etc., etc. The whole of the bardo of becoming has an average duration of 49 days and a minimum length of 1 week, but varies, just as how some people live to be 100 years old and others die in their youth. Some can even get stuck in the bardo to become spirits or ghosts, and it goes on and on from there. That's pretty detailed, and if you want super detailed, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is your go-to book. There are various translations, and I talked about this I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, I kind of loaded up on translations of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. This one ended up being my favorite out of looking at them. It's a nice modern translation and contains a lot of stuff that isn't in the other versions, and it's fairly easy to read, but it's long. So, there's a whole bunch of different versions out there. Now, one of the questions I've always had about this stuff, which my wife brought up to me when we were discussing it, is how do these people know this stuff? And this I said in one of my... What is my hair doing? This I said in one of my earlier books. I'm paraphrasing here. I was kind of making fun of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, saying that, I don't know, every time I try to read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, my question is, how do they know this stuff? It just sounds like mere speculation. Anybody could just make this stuff up. Now, I still think that's a good point. But now this is where I'm going to start to sound like a New Age weirdo, and I'll probably turn off a certain contingent of my audience. But, who cares at this point? As I've kind of gone on with this process of continuing to practice and continuing to do what I do and deepen my meditative experience and etc., I've come to realize that the more one meditates, the more one becomes, and this is where I start to sound like a weirdo who hangs around New Age bookstores and one of those guys and one of those people that I hate to sound like, but here goes anyway. The more one becomes receptive to, I hate to even say this, energies that one was not receptive to before doing a lot of meditation. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry to sound like that, but it just happens. And it seems to me that somebody who spent a lot of time, like way more time than me, doing lots and lots of meditation, especially somebody who's doing kind of esoteric practices that some of the Tibetan Buddhists were into, that are kind of directed towards trying to understand some of the, let's call them unseen realms, might be able to gather a certain amount of information about things that ordinary people don't know much about. Having said that, I think one of the reasons that the Zen Buddhist stream, the stream of Buddhism that I study and teach in, one of the reasons we don't talk about this stuff very much, that one of the reasons Dogen really kind of doesn't say a whole lot. I read to you the sum total of what Dogen says about what happens to you after you die was what I read to you in the beginning of this video. That's it. That's all he says. So for a guy who wrote a ton of stuff about the meaning of life and, whatnot, that's what he says about what happens after you die. Just 2 or 3 sentences. That's it. That's all you get. One of the reasons he only says that much is because nobody really knows. Even if you get into kind of higher meditative states and kind of get a kind of a vague sort of impressions of these so-called unseen realms, you're still left with not much. A little. You get a little, but it's still not much. And so I think most of the details one finds in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and even some of this stuff that I read to you from Philip Kapleau and all this stuff, I think is impressions mixed with speculation. But those impressions, I think, are valid. And going out on a limb a little bit more, one of the reasons that I have become interested in this sort of intermediate realm stuff is because ever since my dad died, there have been a lot of impressions coming my way. So I'm pretty aware that my dad is hanging around somewhere and going through something like this bardo of becoming, or this intermediate realm. He seems to be in the intermediate realm, you know, as far as you know, however you want to try to describe it. He seems to be there. That would be what I think is happening to him right now. And hopefully he'll be able to move along from there. I know that kind of sounds woolly and weird and like something a religious convert says. I have no interest in trying to convince you that it's true, because there's nothing, I can't put forward evidence. In anything, I kind of thought it through before making this video, and anything I could say by way of trying to present it to you as evidence is going to sound weak. And I've seen all those, like the TV shows where they try to prove that reincarnation is real and all this stuff, and that people have talked to the dead and all this stuff, and I've looked at them too, and they look hokey to me. And the same sort of hokey nonsense from your point of view has happened to me over the past week and a half or so. And if I told you what's happened to me over the past week or so, you're going to say it sounds like hokey nonsense to you. Until it happens to you personally, it probably always going to sound like hokey nonsense. Probably. So that's where I'll leave that. But anyway, I thought that stuff was kind of interesting, and I'm going to keep studying it and see where I get with it, and maybe I'll do more videos on that. I have some other quotes Dogen gave about death and dying that I might do a video on, but this video has already gone on too long, so I'm going to leave it at that. If you want to contribute to me buying more books about death and dying and trying to figure out where Dogen got his ideas about death and dying, you can go to the URL that you are seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is how I make a living, and that is my main means of support, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta support me if you don't want to support me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Ziggy did not want to come outside today, I think because it's too cold. He just wanted to stay in his little bed. So there's the cameo you get from him. I tried to convince him to come outside, but he wouldn't come. Alright, I'll let you rest here, Ziggy. Rest from your resting. See you around, Zig.